I'd like to welcome you guys to this week's report. It's been another fantastic week of fishing across Southern California, and we've got quite a heat wave going on this weekend. It's already hot here in the studio, so I may keep the studio end of this a little short and go into the office and talk about some tactics that I employed over the weekend. But let's head up to the map. Starting up at the Channel Islands, continue to get summertime fishing up there, and there's some sign of sea bass on this new moon we're having right now. I think the Aloha Spirit had 22 fish up that way the other day. Could be a one-off. We'll have to wait and see if the fish bite again, but nice warm water up that way. Plenty of bass biting, stuff like that. Probably find a marlin up that way if you're going to look for one. That's basically it up for that way. We can head down to San Clemente Island. There's been some yellowtail biting there on the front side, also some good bass fishing for the guys that are going over there. Not a lot of pressure because everybody's fishing offshore mostly, but the sport boats like the Thunderbird and the Fury, they're getting good yellowtail fishing on the front, typical summertime fishing. Private boaters are getting good calico bass fishing the kelp on the back side and front side of the island. There's still a lot of tuna up between Cat and Clemente and Nick in that general area, and most of the boats that are fishing out there are getting their scores at night. Long range trips, multi-day trips on sport boats. Thunderbird had a huge trip last week where they filled the holds in one night up there, all big fish. That's that knife jig and sardine kind of bite. The guys are fishing that torpedo sinker like a drop shot. I'm sure you've probably seen something about that. I don't do that type of stuff, but it's a pretty ingenious way of doing it. So you might be able to Google how guys are doing that for those bigger tuna if you're going out. Boats are also getting fishing a kite up there and trolling your spreader bars, Mad Max, all that stuff. Pretty good, pretty much the same as it was last week. Heading into Cat, there's pretty good fishing there over the weekend. I fished there, and I'll talk a little bit more in depth about it when I go into the office here. But we started there on the east end in the morning. We had some really nice calico bass fishing on crankbaits shallow. You know, we had the boat sitting about 10, 12 feet of water, casting into basically 0 feet of water, and good quality bass fishing there in the morning. And then it got slowed down in there. It was big swell. A lot of the areas we couldn't, big south swell. A lot of the areas we wanted to go to, we couldn't go to because it was too rough. So we went up the backside, and the current was running offshore or uphill like crazy, and the bass were not biting. So we decided to bend it off the island to go look around, and pretty quickly found our first spot of bluefin. Matt hooked one on a crankbait rod with 30-pound braid, and it quickly broke them off. We re-rigged with some heavier rods, and then we pulled up, got a double on maybe, I don't know, 20-pound fish real quick. And then the next spot, Matt got another one that was pushing 100 pounds. And then on the final spot, Jimmy got one that was probably the same size class. Sorry about that, I had a little video glitch. I'll talk about the tackle that we used when I finish up the report here, but inside of Cat, the dorado bite is still happening full speed, and basically it's just a huge area. They're all just drifting on the front side of Catalina. They're not looking for kelps, they're not looking for anything. They're finding the fleet, go drift, and you can catch a dorado. If you can get away from the fleet, you can find them in open water. We looked at 4 or 5 patties on the way to Catalina and never saw a dorado, or on the backside, but we weren't really in the zone where they were holding. They're either down off the lower banks, 277 down that way, or up off the front side of Cat. That's pretty consistent. I don't know how long they're going to stay around, but the bite doesn't seem to be dropping off at all. Heading down the coast to the Coronados, the yellowtail bite down there is really good. For the sport boats that are going down there, and also private boaters. My friend Erik Landesfeind has been fishing down there a few times in the last week and had some really good scores on yellows, and they're getting them, you know, sardines, service iron, all that stuff, and some real fun fishing if you're tired of running offshore. Speaking of offshore, the San Diego boats are having consistent fishing for mixed tuna, yellowfin and bluefin. They're all nice, you know, 40, 50-pound fish from the looks of it. They're also doing some pretty well on the dorado some days if they get on the right patty. Seems like most of that stuff is pushing up into U.S. waters, though. I know there's a bunch of yellowfin down off Ensenada and stuff, but I don't think anybody's really running down there except multi-day trips. and most of the long-range boats are up off the west end of Cat. So it's about 850 degrees in the garage here, so I'm going to get ready to go into my office to share some techniques. Before I get into this oven here, I want to touch base on one more thing. The other day, I think it was last week or the week before, I was talking about using bass tackle to catch these tuna, and the disadvantage you have with a graphite rod, 100% graphite rod. And the two fish that Matt and Jimmy caught over the weekend were both on basically this type of tackle. Jimmy had a 400 size reel, but this is a 300 pen fathom, 60 or 50 pound braid, 60 pound leader, little popper on a 7-foot graphite composite rod. Due to the fact that this rod has a tip that bends a lot but shuts off further back than a graphite rod does, they were able to put a tremendous amount of pressure on these fish, as you can see in these photos. And both those fish were in the boat in less than 10 minutes. And even, Matt's was snagged in the middle of the back. If you snag one of these bluefin, you know how hard they pull. And that's with a 300 size bass reel. This is his weedless swim bait rod for calicos. And if you've been thinking about throwing a hard bait for or a popper ending on a bass size reel for these bluefin, graphite composite's the way to go. This is a Rain Shadow Judge series, which is a very small diameter rod. It's got a carbon reinforcement on the graphite back section, which makes for a lighter rod, easier to cast. But any graphite composite rod will work, but it really makes a huge difference. So if you're thinking about doing it, I highly recommend getting yourself one. Okay, so here we are looking at Catalina Island, and I want to talk a little bit about our day. So we started out on the east end of the island here. You can see the little crossbar there. Fishing calicos, shallow. We had a big surge of south swell coming up here. Had all the bait pushed up against the island. We also had current going uphill, which was hitting the island, and basically, so as this current comes up the line, it hits all these different shelves here on the ridge of Catalina Ridge, and nutrients collect, and that gets pushed up by the swell up against the beach, which attracts bait fish, and the calicos hide in that dirty water to feed. And they're biting really good in there. When fishing like that, you want to keep your boat a safe distance away from shore, but you also want to be close enough to get it up into the whitewash, whatever your bait is. But that worked out pretty well in the morning. We normally go around the backside and fish the kelp that's outside of Orange Rocks, Salta Verde. We got around the back. The kelp at Orange Rocks was invisible because it was, we thought it was gone, but it was actually just pulled down like 20 feet from the uphill current, which is just raging, which made for pretty tough bass fishing. We had similar conditions up at the Salta Verde, where the kelp's pulled down far enough that you can't really effectively fish the bass there unless you use a lead head with a swim bait, which we don't really use. We want to catch them on the surface. So we decided to bend it off the island a bit, and let's zoom out here for a second. There had been fish seen way off the west end of Clemente. There had been fish seen up by Santa Barbara Island, and there had been fish down by the mackerel bank earlier in the week, bluefin. So rather than try and run 18 miles to the mackerel bank, or maybe 18 to 20 miles up to the west, we decided to just kind of bend it straight off the island at Salta Verde. And as soon as we got off the island, we started to see shearwaters, and it was just rafted up. And my thought process was, the last time I'd seen shearwaters rafted up there, we had caught really big bluefin just outside of Farnsworth in the Cat Canyon up here. So once we started seeing those shearwaters, we started scanning pretty hard, and we're barely 2 miles off the island, and we had our first spot of fish pop up, which we got a cast on. They're look like smaller ones, but Matt got broke off. He's using the wrong tackle, and they sank out, and then we didn't see anything at all for a while. And we were an hour and a half before the tide. It was early. It was just a fluke that those fish popped up. But so now where do you go? You just had a spot of fish come up, and not sure what to do next. So we noticed that we were sitting on the edge of the 500 fathom curve, which is basically the spot where Catalina touches the bottom of the ocean, where the island starts to rise. You have the flat ocean bottom here, and it starts to rise up. I think it's about 3,000 feet there. It doesn't matter the depth. But since that current was running uphill strong, very strongly, that depth in water, the water depth change is like putting your thumb over the hose and spraying water. So what happens is as it goes from 3,000 feet to 500 feet, that water that's traveling at a good speed gets condensed and goes faster, and that faster movement creates these eddies, which in turn will aggregate not only bait along this fathom curve, but also kelps, which is, you see a lot of kelps lined up. If you drive up that thing, you see a million kelps. They don't usually have fish on them. But anyway, so we knew that those fish that we saw were relating to the current and that fathom curve at the base of Catalina Island, about 3 miles off the island. So instead of running on to Clemente or the mackerel bank, we just decided to drive down that fathom curve and follow that slowly and wait for something to happen. 5 minutes later, another spot came up, and we got 2 smaller fish out of it. That stuff dried up altogether. We didn't see anything for quite a while. We were glassing, so we got away from the fathom curve. We ended up kind of out in no man's land chasing birds. It might have been on fish, but they weren't up and active. So now we're like, okay, we don't see any more tuna. We got 2 on the boat, but they're small ones. What do we do now? So everybody's knee-jerk reaction is to go where they were biting before, or go in a direction that all the boats just passed you going, that were going up the fish up off the west end of Clemente. But what we did instead was we went back to where we saw the fish. So we cruised back in now. And I always keep my track line going, and I make note of where exactly I'm seeing fish. And we get back in there, and now we're closer to the tide, and we start seeing fish popping everywhere. And they weren't really aggregated like the ones were that we got the 3 bites off earlier. So we just kind of sat around waiting for the fish to get together properly, which was just a circular foamer as opposed to a bunch of fish feeding in a direction. And when we got in there, Matt got his fish on his first cast. We fought the fish for about 10 minutes, got it cleaned up, gutted, and all the other stuff, and then went back and looked again, and then it was Jimmy's turn. We pulled up to the next spot, and he immediately hooked one. And after that, it was, 11:30 or 12 o'clock. We pretty much had enough, so we ended up leaving, and we drove by fish all the way down the island on the way out, all the way down to the east end. We saw our last spot of fish pop up. So if you're out there and you see something, try and figure out why it's there. We saw a spot of tuna that popped up, only one, but it was relating to something that was repeatable. If it was out here somewhere, I wouldn't know what to do. But since it was associated with the structure, it's very easy to make a decision to do that. And the good thing about that is every other boat that drove by just drove by right into wherever they were going. I don't know if they caught anything or not, but they could have very easily just stopped right there and caught fish. But yeah, that's basically it. So just my thought process on how we found those fish. And the last aspect of that was I put some knowledge about those shearwater birds being in that area from a fish we caught 3 years ago. And that gave me the confidence that, hey, it's setting up the same. And it ended up being the same. It was a different grade of fish, but it was the same exact scenario. That's about it. I hope you guys have good luck if you're fishing this weekend. And maybe just go out and try and figure some stuff out. Have a good weekend.